have Betsy DeVos, who's a billionaire heiress, and her goal, her agenda essentially has been to privatize public education. And what that means essentially is take control out of the public sphere and put it in private hands. Do you think that's a good answer for our problems?
No, and I'll give you the two strands of thought that inform my opinion on that. One is the one we started with in terms of this idea of who is accountable for these so-called failures. And you know, you can't, there's an argument that's put forth to justify this privatization. And so that argument is false for several reasons. Number one, when kids arrive and they're not ready to learn. In Chicago, for example, our schools are depicted as failing. And they're depicted as failing because of the failure of an entirely different group of people outside of schools, like I just talked about, right? There's a way to see through that. There was a study done in 2007 and just replicated just past this month, the results were just released. What it showed is that Chicago public schools are better than any school system in the state when you look at what they do with what they get. Meaning that there is no better school system for a poor student to go to than Chicago public schools. They grow academically more in Chicago public schools than they grow in any other school system in the state of Illinois. There is no better school system for a working class child to go to or a middle income child to go to in the entire state of Illinois than Chicago public schools, because they perform better than children in any other district in Illinois. There is no better school system for a child from a wealthy family to go to than Chicago public schools, because they perform better. Chicago public school students who come from wealthy households perform better than students who come from wealthy households in any other district in the state of Illinois. The issue is that Chicago public schools has a much higher percentage of low-income students. They make up the mass of the students. And so if you just look at overall student performance, it looks like Chicago's not doing well, but when you pay attention to what we do with what we get, then you can see we're outperforming everyone. And that's in large part due to our teachers and our principals, the staff, the people who provide that day-to-day. I think we have the best teachers, the best principals, the best staffing of any district in the state in terms of the skill of the people doing the job. And so right there you have eliminated the basis, the false argument that's supposed to be a justification for the charters. The other side of that is look at the performance of the charters themselves, right? Let's look at the achievement gap, for example. If you look at Milwaukee, charters and vouchers and privatization has been in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin longer than any other place in America. How have they done? Now, let's look at that in terms of the achievement gap, right? Because the achievement gap says that black and brown students are on the bottom, white and Asian students are on the top. So we need to get these black and brown students in places where they can grow. We need these charters for them, right? And so that's what's happened in Milwaukee. Black and brown students are, in large part, the ones who go to the charters. So if the charters were performing better, what's supposed to happen to that gap? It would shrink a bit, right? If they're worse, the gap would grow. If they're about the same, the gap should stay the same. What happened in Wisconsin over the 20 or 30 years? Wisconsin now has the largest achievement gap in the United States. The largest, so something's happening there with those charters in terms of the students who are going to them are not growing academically. Look right here in Washington, D.C., your next door neighbor. If Washington, D.C. was a state, it would beat Wisconsin for the largest achievement gap in the nation. And over half your schools are charters. They're not delivering on the promise. In Chicago, we have an assessment called the MAP. It measures overall performance, but it also measures how much students grow academically. In 2013, 2014, we looked at how charter schools perform overall and how much charter school students grow versus how much Chicago public students perform overall and how much they grow. If you looked at overall performance, they looked equal. Students in the charters were about at the 50th percentile. CPS's average was about the 50th percentile. But when you looked at how much those students grew academically, the charters were in about the 48th percentile. Chicago public school neighborhood students were in the 75th percentile. And so there is better teaching and learning happening in public schools, but public schools more and more, students who are low income and less likely to achieve are being concentrated into those public schools, while the charters are getting kids who may be low income but are not at the bottom end of low income. And so you can make $40,000 and still be low income. Or you can have a household income of $5,000 and be low income. So charter schools will have low income at the $40,000 range, and public schools are more and more likely to have low income at the $5,000 range, and are therefore dealing with more challenges and still outperforming them in terms of the amount of student growth that they get.